Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. I'm really excited to have you all with us for a great talk that we have lined up. My name is Wagata. I'm director of the Champion Provider Fellowship. And as we get started, just a few housekeeping things that I want to remind you all of. So we'll be muting everyone throughout the presentation, but please use the chat box to let us know if you have any questions or comments that come up during the talk. We'll be monitoring the chat box and keeping those questions to the Q&A at the end. Make sure that you put your Zoom in full screen mode to optimize your visualization of the meeting, and to be able to hear us best, computer audio will work, should work for you. Also, just want to let you know that we'll be posting a recording of the webinar next week by Tuesday. And finally, if you have any technical issues, Alana's monitoring the chat. Just send her a message and she'll try to help you out. So for those of you who took a look at our last newsletter, we're really excited to have launched our Champion Provider Fellowship blog. This will be a space to amplify the voices of our fellows and partners. And the next issue of the blog will be coming out in mid-October. In mid-fall, we'll put out another call for blog topic proposals that will be featured in the late spring and summer publication. So look for that email. And at any time, if you have some ideas or just want to talk through a proposal for a topic, just shoot us an email. You can reach out to Alana and we can walk you through that. And as a reminder, we're providing some technical assistance with drafting these blogs. So please don't be too intimidated by writing. All right. So with that, I'd like to first introduce our moderator, Dr. Lori Bostic-Kamen. So Dr. Kamen is a Champion Provider Fellow, alum. She's a mentor to our fellows, a pediatrician at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center and medical director of Juntos Santa Clara County Park Prescription Initiative. Hi. Hi, Lori. And our presenter today is Ms. Mikaela Randolph. She serves as technical assistant consultant with the Children and Nature Network, working to support the implementation of green schoolyards across the country. Green schoolyards is a strategy to equitably connect children to nature, and Ms. Randolph has nearly 15 years of experience working on a variety of advocacy and public policy issues that range from shared use of schools to addressing disparities in physical activity, park access in low-income communities of color, safe routes to school, and safe routes to park efforts that pair active transportation with park access and educational outcomes. And she's based in Los Angeles and has supported communities across the state on park equity, shared use of schools, and green schoolyards. Ms. Randolph is a champion for equity and enjoys the opportunity to improve and support communities close to home and across the country. Today, she'll be introducing some strategies to provide equitable access to parks and green spaces. And I know that this is a topic that is of the utmost importance, considering the rising rates of childhood obesity that we've recently been talking about during the COVID-19 pandemic. So really excited for today's presentation. As a reminder, we'll be having some time for the Q&A after the talk, but please engage in the chat box, know your thoughts, and keep the conversation going there. Okay, with that, I'll hand it over to you, Mikaela.
Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you. It's just such a pleasure to be able to return to the Champion Providers space, and I admire the work that you do to keep communities safe and healthy. So thank you for the opportunity, Alana. I think I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I don't know what happens where I felt like I had this skill down, and then somehow along the way, it's like has diminished. So we're going to see if I can do this efficiently and in a high functioning way. So can you all see my screen? Yes, that was a thumbs up. Okay, thanks. Okay, so thank you for that introduction. It's always interesting to hear your bio or which version of your bio you've shared with someone. So it's nice to hear that version. I'm really excited to talk to you today about championing park equity and really looking at equitable access to parks. I think you all have such a unique um, perspective on this issue. And so I just want to kind of give you a little bit of overview as to the organization that I represent and some of the work that I do. And I really look forward to engaging in some conversation with you all. So just a little bit about the Children in Nature Network. The Children in Nature Network believes that the well-being of children and the wild places we love are inextricably linked. And while research tells us that regular time outdoors is essential for children's healthy development, our children are less connected to nature than ever before. And I think many of you already know this through your practices and what you're seeing as we try to emerge from this pandemic. So with that being said, prior to the pandemic and school closures, we are aware of the disconnect between children and the natural world, and the pandemic has only amplified the inequities and disparities in nature access. And we know that too often the color of your skin or your zip code dictate whether or not you have access to safe, nearby nature, which we know is not by accident, it's by design, right? So just briefly, the theory of change is to increase equitable access to nature. We need to influence big systems that impact children's lives through city policies and programs, schools and early childhood programs, family access to safe nearby green spaces and outdoor experiences, and youth development programs to inspire a new generation of diverse, nature-smart leaders. So I wanted to just take a moment to contextualize this presentation. I think this work has always been important to me. I've been engaging in kind of park equity, shared use, like I said, for over a decade now, and I've been doing this green schoolyard work for about 6 years, and so what we know is that one thing is when the world in essence basically shut down, we saw disparities in what families and communities and children could actually do, right? So it's like, is there a park in walking distance? Is there a safe place for you to walk in your community? Were key questions that came up, right? And so people, even though we were all in many ways experiencing the same things, how we were experiencing those same things really differed, based on your community. And so I'm just highlighting on this slide a few of the things that I think we're seeing, and you all can probably attest to, that you're seeing in clinic or in practice. So we're starting to see an increase, kind of a reverse. There's been so much work. When I started this work in childhood obesity over a decade ago, it was specific ARA funds that came from the Obama Foundation that worked on that allowed me to work on policy and system change around childhood obesity. So we're starting now to see an increase in those childhood obesity rates and diabetes, type 2 diabetes, in our children. We're also seeing increase in social isolation and a decrease in social cohesion, which really speaks to the mental health aspects of this work. And we definitely have seen an increased interest in park utilization, right? People are very just like being locked in our homes. We are really just eager to be able to explore a trail or to explore the outdoors, almost by any means necessary, like just get me outside, because it felt so isolating and just inhibiting in so many ways to be stuck inside, right? I know many of you all are working on Park RX, and so I just want to introduce a couple of different strategies to you all today that are kind of even beyond Park RX. So we're going to be looking at some green schoolyards and safe routes to parks. So Green Schoolyards has an action agenda, and the overall vision is that all U.S. communities offer access to green schoolyards by 2050 to enhance children's healthy development, community well-being, and positive environmental impacts. So there are a lot of goals that are kind of embedded within this vision. And when we think about all communities, that's anywhere from the one school district, to a school district as large as LAUSD, right? So we really want to see this work reflected across all communities. And I think California serves as such a great example for, really establishing both rural and urban environments, right? So if we look at the state of green schoolyards today, it's so interesting because I do this work across the country. And so even if it's not strictly asphalt, it just might be grass or an open field, and schoolyards can be so much more. But I think in California, what I've experienced mostly is that our schoolyards are mostly asphalt. And so what we have is these large impermeable surfaces that are a breeding ground for heat, and it makes it really uncomfortable for children to kind of be in these spaces, right? So you have maybe if you think about the design of a schoolyard, you might have this large kind of what you see here, and this is actually in Chicago, not even in California, where you'll see a large swath of uh, land of a schoolyard, right? And then like some piece of playground equipment kind of plunked down somewhere, right? And often our schoolyards lack shade trees. And they also, in California specifically, tend to lack a lot of green space, which actually helps to diversify play, right? So it's something that I think about when I think about the green schoolyards is it encourages a different type of physical activity. Um, so the potential of green schoolyards is vast, and I know a lot of people probably immediately think about gardens, but schoolyards can be so much more. And so just obviously a few benefits of the green schoolyards is it offers ample play area to engage more children, right? During recess and during the physical education period. So that obviously leads to increased physical activity. So when I talk about that diversity of play, what you can do, on asphalt is different if have, logs or, wood chips that are encouraging a different type of play, or if there's tree shading, right, or a tree canopy on your campus, it's just going to encourage a different type of play. And so what we see is we see a reduction in stress levels and an increase outcomes in mental health, increase in academic performance, and increase in enrollment in schools, because children actually get excited to be able to come to these school grounds. And it also helps to eliminate some of that social isolation that we were talking about at the top, because more community is welcomed on these campuses. And then the community actually sees these spaces as community spaces that they can all engage, and you get intergenerational connection and all of these co-benefits of a green schoolyard. In addition, from a more sustainability and climate change perspective, there's the opportunity to manage stormwater, provide outdoor classrooms, edible gardens, et cetera. So a green schoolyard could be a lot of different things. And so the next slide is really about, well, what is a green schoolyard? So green schoolyards are more than school gardens, and they can include anything from outdoor classroom space, which is something we've really been championing here at the Children in Nature Network in partnership with some of our partners in the Bay Area around, when children return to in-person instruction, allow them in the climate that is, California, to learn outside, but teachers obviously need some support with that, right? They can include trails. If there is a schoolyard that is park adjacent, which in many of our communities we see kind of like the co-location of schools and parks, that's an opportunity to have a conversation with parks departments to see how there could be an exchange and use of those sites, right? So the Children in Nature Network has a host of tools and resources. We have a whole toolkit basically on getting started with some of these steps that are listed here, moving forward, and also what does sustaining impact look like. And so a lot of my day-to-day work with the Children in Nature Network as a technical assistance consultant is I'm currently supporting 6 cities across the country around getting their district-wide open access green schoolyards projects um, kind of off the ground, right? What does that look like? And so the only city I have in California is El Cajon, but I'm really excited to be working with that school district. So here, and a lot of the resources, I'll just back up for a second and say, a lot of the resources that I'm sharing are all available online. So I'm happy to kind of share links if you all need support with making the case for what this might look like in your respective community. So I think the health and wellness benefit of this will is probably what feels most applicable to you all. And so again, you've heard me talk about the physical activity, the mental health, social, emotional, and kind of what I call diversity of play, but beneficial play. I mean, all of these probably are very much in alignment with what you are trying to achieve in your, practice, right? In your day-to-day increased physical activity, of like kind of green schoolyard really serves as like a step towards prevention, right? So, and again, I kind of spoke lightly about outdoor classrooms. Sorry, I'm going to address questions in the chat, like after I get through my, because I was like, oh, that was a long question. I thought it might have been just an audio issue, but again, we do champion green schoolyards as an opportunity for outdoor classrooms. And then I will say that, again, we have a bunch of tools and resources to kind of support. And I'm really interested to hear from you all about what type of tools and resources would be beneficial for you as providers in terms of making the case for accessing green schoolyards. So I'm going to briefly do a couple of, share a couple of case studies with you. And so this first one is from Education Outside, which is an organization that unfortunately no longer exists. But what they did is they brought hands-on experiential science and environmental education to San Francisco Unified School District, ensuring that every public elementary school student had access to the outdoors and nature as part of their regular school day, which I think is huge. And so they worked with the school district to secure nearly $14 million in city bond funding to design and construct green schoolyards at 84 public schools throughout San Francisco. And so this is just like, and it's just so interesting because if we know schools, there's such a large opportunity that in most places, school districts are the largest public property owners. And so there's such a huge opportunity. So if we're talking about park access, and it's really, in a lot of urban environments, it's really pretty much unfathomable to be like, oh, we're going to build another park that's going to serve X amount of people. It's just not really grounded in reality of what can be done. But a schoolyard really opens up an opportunity to create access to parks and work. There's a lot of different ways we can kind of get to these outcomes. So I'm going to stick with San Francisco for a minute. And so, like I said earlier, we really at the Children in Nature Network are aiming for district-wide open access, meaning open to the community, and that level of openness varies based on what's comfortable to the district. But the San Francisco Green Schoolyards Project is led, like I said, by the San Francisco School District, and it's actually housed in the district's Office of Sustainability. So where they're addressing sustainability issues such as energy, water, waste, and transportation, green schoolyards is also included in that. So my previous slide, when I talked about Education Outside no longer being an organization that exists, fortunately, the efforts that were happening across the school district within San Francisco were so impactful that they were able to actually house that at the school district. So this could be a point of entry of conversation if you all are, if this is like in your community and you're interested in getting involved. So I'm going to move to Oakland, so still kind of staying in the Bay Area, but moving east to the East Bay. So Oakland Unified took a more comprehensive approach to school greening with the adoption in early 2019 of a school board policy around the development of living schoolyards. And they also included this in their environmental and climate change literacy policy, which was huge. And then lastly, they included school greening in the facilities master plan. So much of this green schoolyards, a lot of the onus feels like it's on the school district because it is that their property, right? But I think the role of community and providers when there's kind of pushback or hesitancy around this is to really uplift your stories about what you're seeing in practice and what you're seeing in clinics around, preventable chronic diseases, right, that you're seeing in your children. And so I think, or in your patients, I should say. And so I think when you are able to see something that's so comprehensive, like this Oakland model, where we did a site visit, and some of the students that you see here are, I think, fifth graders, and they were ambassadors for the schoolyard. And the way, this is only a snapshot of what this looks like, but they had a chicken on their school, like a few chickens, honestly. And there's just such a reciprocal relationship between their interaction with nature and their caregiving for not only like the garden, but also the animals that are in the garden and what this space looks like. So it's quite inspiring. And then I'm moving to the Central Valley here for you all. And in the Central Valley, I worked with Stockton Unified School District and Patterson School Districts to provide guidance on really partnership or interested party engagement, to think about who do you want to bring to the table, who is important to be part of this conversation, to start transforming this school space. And what was fascinating at a school in Stockton, El Dorado here, they already had a student garden, but the school really focused on restorative justice practices, right? And so from that end, they were really thinking about how not to be punitive with this population of students that they serve, that tended to be a high transient population, like those that started the school year weren't necessarily those that ended the school year, or you would have a lot of students who are joining kind of mid semester or what have you, and that can cause a lot of disruption, right? And so they really saw the need to kind of provide a safe space on campus that allowed students who were being disruptive for whatever reason to kind of find some solace and restore themselves so that they could return to the classroom kind of ready to learn. And that also felt like there was a need for teachers and faculty and staff to also have this space where they could also kind of find a reprieve from perhaps the chaos of the day. And so when we think about green schoolyards and the multiple benefits, it's not just the children themselves, but it is also an opportunity for, the staff and whoever else is experiencing, who interacts and engages on that campus. So I'm going to move through these last few slides. I want to introduce this other kind of strategy that is called Safe Routes to Parks. This is not a strategy that the Children in Nature Network leads. This is actually led by the Safe Routes Partnership and the National Recreation and Parks Association. I used to work at the Safe Routes to School, and I started kind of the beginning process of the Safe Routes to Parks. And so what happened here is Safe Routes to Parks are approximately 10-minute walks or bike rides to parks that are accessible via multiple modes of transportation for people of all ages. That's kind of the idea behind them. They're conveniently located, like I said, within approximately a half mile or what would be seen as a 10-minute walk from where people live, and they're safe from traffic and personal danger. So ideally, they're not, you can get there without having to combat so much high traffic area. And you're actually increasing physical activity with this idea of safe routes to parks, right? Because if you're walking a half mile or 10 minutes to the park, and then you're actually engaging with whatever physical activity at the park, then you're just like increasing that physical activity level. And I think this really pairs this idea of safe routes to school, which is a 5-step approach, with park equity and park access, which is really exciting in my opinion. So basically the 5 components of Safe Routes to Parks are to engage, assess, plan, implement, and sustain. So engaging community, assessing for the opportunity, planning out, what this plan to get to the park by walking or biking looks like, and then actually implementing the plan and then looking at what are the opportunities to sustain. Some of that is through partnerships with the university just to gather data and metrics. And so I'm just going to take you through this slide. Oh, sorry, is that not showing up fully for y'all? Anyways, I think so. This Houlihan Park is this 3-acre. This is happening in Planada, California. Safe Routes to Parks case study, right? So it's a 3-acre park located in the heart of the community. It's the only developed park accessible to all residents of the Planada community, except for recreational facilities at some of the local schools. So this park was underutilized, right? I was like drought, vandalism, crime, lack of a restroom, and other facilities that really didn't make it a space that community wanted to go to, right? Especially families. They weren't regularly visiting this park in their community. So in collaboration with residents, community organizations, nonprofits, and county and municipal agencies, Cultiva la Salud developed a Safe Routes to Parks improvement plan that outlined the barriers and obstacles that prevented residents from walking to and from the park, and highlighted some of the essential elements of a safe park and neighborhood. So with the plan, they were able to bring a landscape architect to help create a dream park plan. And most importantly, put price tags on each element that the community had named that they wanted. And so after the wish list was completed and the costs were identified, as a community, they began to agree to start with enhancements that would immediately improve the park. And even if that meant it was on a smaller scale. And then I was like super excited as I was preparing for this presentation to revisit this community. And so just in August of this year, the Merced County got awarded a little bit, almost $2.5 million funds from Prop 68 to like put together these improvements. So now the new amenities at the roughly 4-acre park will include a new splash pad, an outdoor stage, a jogging path, resurfaced basketball courts, pavilions and barbecues, among several other amenities. And so I was like so excited when I saw that. I was like, oh my gosh, that just happened like in August and was reported. So I think, it just really begs the question like, oh, okay, you have a plan. What good is planning going to do? But it really helps you make your case for funding, right? And so the county of Merced really saw this as an opportunity. So I was super excited to see that their improvements are being funded, right? So then the question here is like, what role can providers play? And like I said, I do have a lot of tools and resources from the Children in Nature Network's kind of green schoolyards advocacy toolkits. There's great infographics that I have. I'm gonna drop those in the link once I can't multitask that well. Once I'm kind of done sharing the screen and everything, I'll drop those in the link so you all can have just the infographics are great. They are research-based, and so they kind of make the connections between green schoolyards and academic outcomes, green schoolyards and physical activity, green schoolyards and mental health benefits, right? So one thing that I think is you all as providers have such great perspective, and it's a voice that we don't necessarily hear in practice. And so if possible, when you all have time, I would invite you to kind of do some initial research in your community around, are there existing meetings that are happening around this issue, right? Around park access, around green schoolyards, around a safe routes to park, anything like that, and start attending those meetings and start elevating your voice from that provider's perspective. I mean, I think you all are valued in communities and your perspective is really important, especially when you're speaking to community members who, for whatever reason, might have their own apprehension, or community members that are more hesitant, I would say, to put some of these improvements in and not understanding why it's so important, right, to adopt a green schoolyard or implement a safe routes to parks plan. I think when possible, sharing information with your fellow providers. I mean, I think you all are cohort right here, and that is great. So I think you probably have the space to actually exchange, like on a peer level, right? But when possible, like if you can convene partners even outside of the provider community and understand what that looks like and provide that kind of peer-to-peer exchange, I think that would be really great. Um, and then tap into existing resources to engage stakeholders. So that's kind of some of the resources that I will share with you so that you all don't feel like you have to kind of reinvent the wheel or start from scratch with some of this, that some of the research has already been done for you and that there are tools and resources that help you to make the case. So I will drop those in the link once I'm done screen sharing. Some of these call to actions are pretty, I'm really, like I said, interested to hear from you about what role you all see you could potentially play. But I read just an amazing op-ed recently talking about children and their re-entry into in-person learning and what that meant. And I can't necessarily say that that was from a provider's perspective, but I think, I would love to read more op-eds from a provider's perspective. Like, what are you seeing in office? And I think, or in clinic, I think that would be really powerful to read. And you can start as local as your local newspaper and never know where an op-ed like that could take you, in terms of information sharing, be that to the national level or beyond. And I think, like I said before, with that peer-to-peer exchange, really work to lift up park access and park equity issues with your fellow colleagues. I think feels like important. You all might be part of this cohort of champion providers, as part of the fellowship, but there are your colleagues that aren't a part of this, right? And so that opportunity to share and exchange information, and I'm ignorant on, like, I don't know what that looks like specifically in your professional setting, but I would definitely highly encourage that. So with that being said, because that was a lot of talking for me, that's my information. So feel free to reach out. And I think I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen if that's okay, so we can all see each other. Do you all want me to address the question in the chat, or how do you want to proceed? Go ahead.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I just want to download your whole brain. Um, but yeah, we can jump into the question and answer session, I think, now, and we have time for some more questions. And we want to point out that if we're unable to address all of your questions, we can follow up with you after offline afterwards. But Crystal put a great question in here for you, this long question, which is awesome. So I'm just going to read it out for you and then see what you think about. But what are some funding and or other opportunities that school administrators may not know about that help reduce barriers to building green schoolyards and opening their school sites for shared use? Some of our local school site maintenance fees as a barrier for shared use. What can be done about this?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it depends on where you are to a certain extent. Sorry, I'm trying to put these resources in the chat for you all and find the send button. But I think what's the opportunity, I would say, is it depends on where you're located to a certain extent, but it also depends on your ability to think through out of the box funding, if you will. So one key funding mechanism that I really get excited about is hospital community benefits. And so many of you all actually work in, a clinic setting or a hospital setting. And so I think even just having a conversation about how are our benefits, where are they going to the community? Is this a place where we can fund? I know the work that I actually did in the Central Valley was funded by Kaiser through the community benefits program. And so that's how we were able to have staff to come to do site visits and really work with the community in that way, right? So I think that feels like a pretty untapped resource to apply to this work. And then I'm just like, I want to see the day where there's more public private funding going towards these efforts, right? So I would love for any of our professional sports organizations to start seeing, I mean, these are elite athletes, right? I would love for these organizations to potentially see the connection in so much of the work that you all do, and start putting some money, like, like you all come up with the ideas, like you are providers, right? You're doctors, you're, running the whole spectrum of our health care system. And so it'd be amazing to kind of get on that level of conversation where you could say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what we're seeing. We know that you want to see future generations of fans coming through to see these games. How about we figure out some type of funding mechanism to support some of the work that you're doing, and at the same time ideally reducing some of the preventable chronic diseases that you all are seeing. So those are things that excite me in terms of funding opportunities. Obviously there's traditional stuff like working with your city or county department, and through community development block grants, when you're talking about park improvements. Thank you, Alana, for putting the note in around Prop 68, which is a state California proposition that funds greening. It's a parks proposition. The other thing is stormwater, right? There's a lot of opportunity for kind of what we call green infrastructure for stormwater, and moving towards a green infrastructure for stormwater, right? So when we think about, how our water is kept in our respective, localities, we're not really paying too much attention, but most of it is like something gray, right? That we just don't, and it's impermeable, and we don't necessarily pay too much attention to it. And especially in a state that's so water starved as California, we're not often, it's not always top of mind, right? But there's a lot of movement and propositions around stormwater capture. So when it does rain, where does that water go? And there's a huge opportunity for park renovations, and actually cities and municipalities actually have to adhere to like some state and federal storm water guidance. And so that, get familiar with some water bonds. I know it sounds like out of the box a little bit, but you'll start seeing that a little bit more and more, the connection between like parks and water. Hopefully that answered that question. Other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. I have another question for you. What are some key barriers in championing park equity work, and what suggestions do you have to overcome those barriers?
I think one key barrier is probably pretty obvious, is funding, right? Like you can't really build a ton of new parks. You can't overpromise that. And I think I'm a practitioner, but I don't build parks, right? Like I bring people together. I, facilitate conversations. I can direct you towards funding, but I'm not applying for a grant, necessarily on your behalf. And so I think we all are kind of collectively limited in what we can do. And that can feel like a barrier, but I do believe very strongly in the power of bringing the right people together, and especially community voice, right? Like bringing those mostly impacted like together is it's a chore, right? Because everyone has competing priorities. But when you do it, you also have this collective voice that you're able to communicate and advocate for change with. And I think there's a true power in that. And I think that example from Planeta was, just so exemplary of what happens when you bring community together. I also think, you all don't need to feel like you need to lead the work. You can be a part of the process. So if there's someone else who's leading the work, then you can just really provide your perspective and your voice in your respective position. And I think there's definitely value added in that. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you suggest fellows initiate conversations about health equity with colleagues in the clinic?
Good question. Good question. I mean, it's so interesting, right? I'm not in your day to day at all. Like, I'm not even a provider. I'm just, me. Um, so I'm curious, like, I'm curious to hear more so from you all about what are those opportunities, right, to kind of engage in this conversation. So if you're in clinic, like, I'm always curious, like, when I take my daughter who's 13 to see her pediatrician, and of course there's like a group, right? So I know there's more than one pediatrician working in there. And so I'm curious, like, what information is shared, and how it's shared, personally. And so I have very candid conversations, I think, with my provider, just because I'm in this world and I am like an advocate for children's health. And I think all of you are too, right? And so I guess I would say, oh, what are you seeing in terms of, I think, I don't know if this is like statewide or how these screening questions come about, but I know I definitely get questions like, how much screen time does your child have? It was so good before COVID. I promise you guys, it was so good before COVID. I was doing okay. And then I lost the battle. So I get questions like, how much screen time is your child consuming? Are they eating, 5 fruits and vegetables a day? Like those types of questions. So I think as you all kind of collect that data, I'm really in seeing that. I am sure it differs so much depending on like the community, but I would be really interested to see how you all pick up on trends, just even in the office, right? Like, oh, we're seeing physical activity levels going down because parents are afraid to like let their kids go to the park, right? So I'm all team free range parenting. So I just want my child to go, right? But then there's like safety, even more, I would think, safety precautions and hesitations that come with that, right? So we're not so eager to just like let our kids go because we don't know who all is at the park and how many people are at the park now, and if are people wearing their masks and does that feel like a safe place to engage? So I guess I would start from the data. I think data drives policy change and can, include, programs, right? And so I think if you all, whatever that looks like, right, are kind of collectively looking at your data of what's happening in clinic or in the practice, then that would be a sharing moment, and really thinking through what can we do, collectively to kind of help our community, right? I mean, and that zip code statement that I made earlier is, you all know, like, it's so real, right? Like, literally based upon where you live can determine, your life expectancy, your quality of life, so many different things. So that disparity can be so heightened for what some of you all see. And even if you control for like educational attainment and even income, still in like communities that are majority communities of color, you can still, have that same disparities that exist, right? Because of how the built environment, if you will, is, right? How the environment, like literally how transportation, a bridge or a train track can be the divider to like who has access to what, right? Says that advocacy toolkit contains sample policy language, specifically the language. So I can definitely share the language that Oakland Unified School District used. That work was done a lot with Trust for Public Land. And I think they are doing a lot of work around green schoolyards, And yeah, I'm happy to share that because I just thought it was so exemplary how they hit all the points, right? I haven't seen as comprehensive of a policy around school greening like I have in Oakland. I thought, that's pretty impressive. And I think, we at the Children in Nature Network, we want to start moving towards having a model policy language for the field. So ideally that the language is there, and then a school district can kind of just take that language and augment it for what's appropriate for them. Thanks for that question.
That's awesome. So you gave some ideas about how providers could start to get engaged by like going to coalition meetings and um, how else can providers just get involved with like finding who's doing the work in their community? Like how can we get involved in that policy and systems level change? The people who are already working on these projects that we might not know about or that we might be able to lend our voice to to the work or to spreading the word about the work.
Yeah, I think that hmm, I think I don't know how many of you all are represented in public health, but that's where I started out of grad school. And I feel like your public health peers who are working at the local public health department are such a great um, place to start because they normally have a good pulse of like what initiatives or programs or policies are being championed and what those goals are and how they're aligned to like increase physical activity or diabetes prevention or all these different things, right? So I personally am a huge fan of like our public health partners. And so I think if you all are working kind of in clinic, then I would touch base there. I mean, like, I worked at LA County Department of Public Health, and our peers at, the health services were like so great, right? Because there's the data there. They can give us anecdotal and, anecdotal data as well as like real numbers on what they're seeing, right? And so that informs so much because then we're able to take that data that we're receiving and translate it into the case making document that says, this is why we have to advocate for these types of changes. So I think that's one thing that comes to mind. I also think, I think university partners are great. And so it also just makes me think like if there's like a public health arm of a local university or college, or even like I remember there is the kinesiology department, was really working. So it's all about what types of partnerships you can kind of like tack onto and understand. And so it's like thinking about like within your own sphere, like, okay, do I know someone who works at the university? What are the opportunities there? Oh, do I know someone who works at public health? Like maybe do I have a contact there? Maybe I can connect with that, person and just like have this conversation. I think that could really start something. Sorry, I'm reading this question here. It says, sample policy language would be awesome. Yes, I agree. Do you work at all with the Alliance for a Healthier Generation? I did used to work with the Alliance forever, and I've kind of been working with them a little bit. Like we're starting to ignite our relationship, specifically around green schoolyards, because I know that they can be so school focused with a lot of their work, and it's so complementary for school wellness policy. And I do think we have some examples from across the country of where green schoolyards language has been included in the wellness policy. So I personally am a policy person. So I love talking policy and like finding like what are the different ways that policy can be strengthened or adopted. And so there are a myriad of different ways. And so I think in California, the other barrier that we experience, I think, is it's making the case and like political will, right, to say, oh, not only is there an issue, but we as the elected officials are going to address this issue. But there's a large thing around liability in schools, and so I think there was policy from the California School Board Association that really was facilitating joint use, right? So community use of school grounds. But California is like, I don't know, we're being a little funky about how we use our schools, and it's such a missed opportunity, right? Because I think when people were told to shelter or stay at home, when stay at home orders were in place, I mean, what we saw is our schools were like just just empty, right? Like just not being utilized at all. And I think you see in some school districts, there definitely is a community use policy. And so I know, like in Santa Monica, Malibu Unified School District, there was, every Friday after 5 p.m. or maybe after 2 p.m. or something, the campus would be open. Parents were able to engage, kids were able to burn off energy. I mean, but we're also talking about Santa Monica, a more affluent community, right? That had access to this. And then you have Los Angeles Unified School District, which is the largest school district in California, second largest in the country. And those practices vary, and they are hesitant to put a policy in place. And I think, first of all, public dollars go to our schools, right? Public dollars go to public schools. And so, I think unfortunately puts an onus on the community to say, well, to make that connection, right? And to say that, oh, public dollars, I'm paying tax dollars to the school site that I don't have access to. And so I think school facility people and risk management, more specifically, they tend to forget that schools can really be a community asset, right? And then school greening is kind of like the cherry on top of that. But like even just opening up the campus to the community is like a huge step towards showing added value to the community, right? Because like the school community, in terms of the students, that's like a continuously transitioning, population, right? So it's like you have students who start and then they graduate. And so those parents or whoever that might have been engaged at that school site, they're not there for the long haul. But the community that lives around that school site, they're more than likely there for the long haul. They're more invested. If you are, a homeowner or a property owner and you're paying your taxes, then you're a little bit more invested in what's happening. And I think there's a disconnect sometimes between, I think, school facilitators and like those risk management people in the community. And unfortunately, many of us have to like work with them to kind of make them see the connection and the importance of the schoolyard beyond just educating, our students.
Have you seen programs like a 10-minute walk to schools or 10 minutes from a park? Not walk from schools, but 10 minutes from a park. Have you seen that enhance like this idea or practice of opening up schoolyards to communities? Like how have you seen that kind of play out in terms of equity?
Yeah, it just differs so much depending on where you are. So it's such a good question because, and I don't even know 100%. I'm honestly like leaning on you all, right? With your provider hats on to kind of help, I think, key decision makers, policy makers, see like that's right, kind of in the international planning community around a 10-minute walk community, right? So what if everything was in a 10-minute walk, like your food, your school, your job, like all these different things. And I think it's in theory, such an interesting concept, right? I think it would change the way people live. And I think even like as we are trying to emerge from this pandemic, or at least, the stay-at-home orders have been lifted, I think people have in many ways reevaluated their priorities and how they spend their time, right? So it's not like no one's trying to spend an hour commuting to an office, right? One way and maybe 2 hours, throughout the day. Like that no longer feels like a valuable way to spend time. And so I definitely think there's a moment, you know, I think there's a moment for us to really lift up and demand more from our elected officials and demand like a better way that we're living, you know, like the status quo and what was happening before this pandemic is not going to be acceptable. It's not acceptable from a health perspective, right? Of like what you're actually seeing, you know, in clinic and like what, you know, kind of the outcomes of, you know, what you're seeing is just not acceptable. So I think we have to think about how we're living, you know, collectively and what is more kind of the sustainable, what's more sustainable for us all, you know? I don't know. Does that answer that question? Sorry.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Wish I could just record that sound bite.
This is being recorded, so you will be able to play it.
Yeah, I can play it everywhere I go.
Mikaela says.
It's not acceptable. Mikaela said, and she's right. It's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mikaela. Really a wonderful presentation. I think very thought-provoking and inspirational, and a lot of great calls to action for our fellows. I think really pertinent to us. And I'll just echo your comment about really embracing your public health department colleagues and reaching out to them to partner in this work and not reinvent the wheel, but find ways to kind of amplify the message and make your voice heard, so that we can all kind of contribute to this important work. Thanks, Lori, for moderating. And as we said, you will have this presentation to view and the resources that Mikaela so kindly shared with us will make available to you. So look out for emails coming from Alana with information on how to access that very soon, within the week. And thank you to everyone for joining us after the holiday weekend. Really great turnout, and we appreciate you all being here. And please keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Have a good one.
You too.